Welcome back to Colorful Clipboard. Carrie and I are so glad that you have joined us. And so today we are going to talk a little bit about, so there's a phrase that we often use when thinking about things that from our childhood. And I'm going to go with the term childhood icons. And there's the icons from when we were little. A lot of people know those icons in different ways. So whether it's something like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Captain Kangaroo, I was like, why can't I remember any of the ones my kids watched?
Thomas the Tank Engine.
Yes, Thomas the Tank Engine. Arthur,
Barney.
Barney. Oh. Okay. So PBS, Public Broadcasting System, is a great place to find a lot of our childhood icons. But we also probably have those in some of our favorite books and even movies from when we were kids. And a couple of things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about, what does it mean to be age appropriate? Because just because we remember doing it as a kid doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate for kids under 5. Like, it still may be a 6 or 7 year old thing. So we got to keep that in mind. Carrie is definitely going to help us kind of review and discuss things like copyrights. What's the best way to use those resources? We all have, TV shows or something that we love, everything from the Mouseketeers to pick a Disney movie, right? We all
Arthur, there's lots of them, but it's also, so it's actors, it's TV shows, it's books. Winnie the Pooh is a huge deal to me. I think Winnie the Pooh is, the bee's knees. There was a center that I went and did a little bit of coaching with that I was a little confused by the icons that they had representing that, they had big pictures of at their center because they were British. And in the office, all of the books were Beatrix Potter and Paddington Bear and stuff like that in the office. But in the school, none of those were reflected. And I was confused because there was this disconnect. So if you're going on the tour of the center, you're seeing, modern American icons like Daniel Tiger. And then you go into the office and it's Beatrix Potter and Winnie the Pooh and Paddington Bear. And it didn't make sense together. My nickname, there are people across the world who call me Fred. And in today's world, this gets to be confusing because they're like, is she transgender? No. My maiden name was Rogers, and I'm insanely cheerful, and I'm constantly taking my shoes off. So as a kid, everybody said, oh, you're like Mr. Rogers. So they called me Fred. Maiden name Rogers, take your shoes off all the time. You're obviously Fred Rogers. And there is probably not a week that goes by that I don't think of something that Fred Rogers did. Some way that he improved my life or my kids' lives or TV.
Okay, so the next time you come down to Orlando to visit Marie, let's make sure we go to Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, because that is where he went to college and grew up. And they have all kinds of memorials to him. So anyway, if you want to see a life-size statue of Mr. Rogers sitting on a bench.
I would always like to see. One of my kids' core memories is actually the day that Mr. Rogers died. It's very much, it's not a shiny yellow core memory. It is a blue core memory, but blue core memories are important.
Yeah, I can tell you when John Glenn passed away, we all have our version of and today,
for me, it was Elvis.
Recording this is the day Olivia Newton-John passed away. So I'm going to kick off with her as I launch into what I would call age-appropriate childhood icons. because I do remember it came out when I was 7. So Carrie, you would have been what, 5 or 6, depending on the time of the year. And so I definitely associate Grease as a childhood show.
But when you watch that as an adult, you're like, what were people thinking letting us watch those things? There are a lot of movies that.
Yeah, so not only were the actors really not high school students, they didn't look like high school students, and there was nothing about the content in that was age appropriate for any kid. So let's talk a little bit about perhaps maybe some childhood icons or even books or stories or movies that we often see in child care centers, because the adult who's in that classroom or who's running that program or owning that program, this is something that they think of when they think of child or children. So.
Okay. Well, I have seen Transformers, which is an incredibly violent TV show from what was that, the 80s? I don't know, but it's come back like 8 times.
Well, and everything with that, right? The Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has definitely made its world around. Power Rangers, so.
Yeah. And now it's Yu-Gi-Oh. Well, I'm sure Yu-Gi-Oh is passe, but we have various different fighting TV shows. And the question is, should you have the items from the fighting TV shows or fighting movies in your program? What are the pros and cons of having, I'm always going to side more on comic book people because I was a comic book person. I wasn't a MAGA person. But what is the difference between having a Yu-Gi-Oh action figure and having a Flash action figure? Those are both childhood icons.
A lot of times we hear people talk about, oh, I don't want swords and guns, but they're going to have lightsabers.
Which is a sword gun.
Like it cuts some people in half,
Takes off your hands. We've talked about the whole rough and tumble play and where does that cross into violence play, and you have to draw lines between, am I allowing violence play? What kinds am I? But again, a lot of those are childhood icons. How many little boys that I grew up with had Darth Vader action figures and Luke Skywalker action figures.
Okay, but let's talk this through, because you and I are both, we're both about, we're both the same generation. We're both talking about the same thing. And so to me, I agree. We think of those as little kid things, but they're still not always toddler things. And so that's where I found myself noticing that, I'm like, oh, it's so cute. They have ABC Disney movie, because I love Disney movies, but let's be realistic. A lot of those are really kind of scary for a 3-year-old. And so you have to remember when you're choosing to show a movie or read a book or tell a story or even have a picture on the wall. I remember going to a program that had an awful lot of copyright, very large, characters on their wall, which from an adult standpoint, they were appropriate, right? But they were massive. And I kept thinking to myself, now, if you're looking at that and you're 3,
and they've painted it as an 8-foot Big Bird because Big Bird is 8 foot.
Right.
Is that going to be something that is a positive impact for the kids in that program? Not to mention the fact that you have definitely broken the law.
Okay, so we touched a little bit about age appropriate. So when we're talking about age appropriate, just because Target or Walmart or somebody sells a toy that says 3+ or 2+, and therefore this marketing magnet is trying to sell a toy branded specifically for 2 and 3-year-olds, doesn't necessarily mean that the content is. So, and just because a kid plays with Transformers and Hot Wheels, the transforming Hot Wheels, doesn't mean they've ever seen a Transformers movie. So, definitely kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Even if this is a 4-year-old who knows everything there is to know about Star Wars, don't assume they've actually seen the movie, especially right now, right? We've got all kinds of versions on Disney Plus. We have books, we have animated Star Wars. I mean, it really is. You want to talk about something that is a true monster when it comes to the name. And depending on how old you are as a director or teacher, and your children personally, or nieces, nephews, right? So your family experiences definitely is going to affect what part of that generation do you instinctively
Where do you
respond
plug
to?
into that?
Yeah.
Right. And again, if we're, I have a hard time watching Daniel Tiger, because to me, Daniel Tiger is a weird looking puppet that Mr. Rogers made that always was dealing with emotions. Daniel Tiger was the puppet that Mr. Rogers made to deal with shyness and fear. Like each of his puppets had a purpose, and there were specific emotions that they were there to deal with in his world. And so a whole TV show about a fearful, shy character, I was like, why is this a show? I don't understand. But that's because of where I come into that icon of Daniel Tiger. I come into the icon of Daniel Tiger as a Generation X person who had millennial children. And so for me, it's all about Mr. Rogers. And I have, there's kids in the world that I am part of their lives that are Generation Z. And to them, Daniel Tiger is that animated character who has parents. And I'm just like, he has what?
Yeah, so definitely, and we talk about this when we start talking about art projects. We start talking about it if you're a faith-based organization, and we talk about holidays, right? So make sure you're really aware of what the child is taking away from what you are teaching, not necessarily what do you remember that you think you were a child when you remembered, because most of us do not remember what we learned when we were 2 and 3.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to transition to us talking about using them as decorations in your program. Please don't put up a life-size painting of Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia in your school. You have no legal right to her face or to the character design. So those are 2 different things, and 2 different people own them. So Carrie Fisher's daughter owns the right to Carrie Fisher's face, which is weird, but it's true. And she's off doing her own acting gig now. And the Princess Leia design is owned by, I guess now by Disney. So you can't do a Princess Leia design because Disney owns that, and they can and will sue you, not because they want to put your daycare center out of business, but the way the law works is anytime they're notified that somebody is infringing on their copyright, they have to enforce it, or else the law says that they no longer have a copyright. So if you paint Big Bird on a wall in your school, Sesame Street has to sue you if they hear about it.
Okay, so let's talk about that real fast. And it's not that I'm trying to sell a specific brand, so I'm going to try to not remember the brand. But there are companies that make life-size stickers that you can put on your wall of these licensed characters. So
yeah, and you
sure
can do that. You can absolutely buy those products that are licensed, but make sure they're licensed, that they're not a knockoff you bought on Etsy.
Yeah.
If you're going to buy those stickers.
Is it fat boys, big boys?
Well, there's various different ones, and Disney has some specifically licensed, and so does the Children's Television Workshop. So make sure that you have like I said, don't buy them off of Etsy, because if you buy them off of Etsy and put them in your business has now violated copyright, even though you're not the one who created it, you're displaying it.
And so that goes with, how does that work if you're going to show an animated movie, or even PBS shows during the day? What if you want to do a coloring page?
Or you want to buy the licensed versions, buy the coloring book, rip out the pages of the coloring book. They have to sue you if they find out. They don't have any choice. They don't necessarily want to bankrupt childcare centers or YMCAs or any of that. But if they don't enforce it, they lose the right to their intellectual property. So if, you can have somebody on your staff who can draw a decent Aladdin, that's fine. It's based on the Disney character. It's not the Disney character.
Well, and so even with that, let's talk. I'm going to mention Rapunzel real quick, and I'm going to mention those $1 coloring books, because first of all, if you're doing coloring books, you might as well just buy, 18 copies of a $1 coloring book. And a lot of times those coloring books, if you actually go look at them, the cover will be colored and give you the impression that you are buying Tangled. But if you actually read it, you are reading Rapunzel, and Rapunzel is very different. And so again, make sure you stop for a second and kind of go through, and that you also, this is a great thing to include in staff training. A couple episodes ago, we started talking about all kinds of staff training and, things to include. Well, help your staff understand where did the real fairy tale come from? What is an age appropriate version of that fairy tale?
Can we read actual Grimm's fairy tales?
No.
Hans Christian Andersen is not quite as bloody as the Grimm fairy tales, so maybe start with Hans Christian Andersen.
But your teachers should be educated on this. Your teachers should know that Little Mermaid is not a Disney creation.
Neither is Pinocchio. None of them are.
And so, and it's also worth knowing who owns those things now. And that comes into something like, Sesame Street, that was for years PBS. But yet now you see it pop up in SeaWorld, but it's like, but who owns, and so then there's the whole Jim Henson and the Muppets.
Yeah.
Because Jim Henson and the Muppets is actually owned by Disney. But it's good to know where, don't try. I'm gonna dovetail real quick and just say, don't ever try to figure out the superhero thing with Carrie, because that is its own nightmare in every way, shape, or form, as far as the comic versus the movie versus the live people in costume.
Yeah. There's a lot of different versions, but again, it's childhood icons, right? Yep. It's what are the things that the kids at your center are identifying with, and do you want to another question is, do you want to commercialize your center? Because if you're painting an 8-foot tall Big Bird and violating copyright laws, you're also commercializing the kids. You're telling them that you need to buy things to have a good childhood, and you're telling the parents that. Where if instead you have, flowers and birds and trees painted on your wall, you're sending a very different message.
Yeah.
So
if we get into this holiday season, there's this time period in October where kids like to wear costumes. We all probably have some sort of dramatic play in our area, and you can't have dramatic play and not have kids starting to put capes on and being a superhero of their own, even if you do, I mean, and I've worked with programs that refuse to put any sort of superhero branded clothes, even though parents try to give them to them after every holiday, right? Which I don't blame as a mom of four. I was always trying to give away those dang costumes, but it's worth, kind of going, okay, well, they're going to still try to be a superhero, even if it's not that superhero, right? They're still going to have a cape there. So go get black fabric, red fabric, go let them, or go get some really funky colors that, very few people ever have a cape in this color. So this is good, right? Like you can be this superhero.
Yeah.
But even programs like Captain Planet, again, talking about, especially when Mr. Goodbody and Captain Planet came out originally, they were definitely not commercialized. Just kind of like, in reality, the mouse, I mean, it took almost 25 years for you to be able to find something other than a Timex watch and a black hat with black ears. I mean, now you can't sneeze, turn a corner, even inside of a Walgreens without seeing something branded. Which in my world, making, Christmas stockings are very easy, but that's its own
Another story. But and again, it's, I just keep wanting to bring it back to that thought process of what are the icons that you want to support or perpetuate in your program. I love putting up posters, if you're in a Montessori program, of pictures of Dr. Montessori with her quotes. She is a childhood icon. The kids should know what that, lady looked like. I like having, of course, we said before, quotes from Fred Rogers, because I think he's the bee's knees. But I've put all kinds of other people's quotes up on the walls. I've got Ben Affleck. I think I've got a Ben Affleck poster. I've got John Green, Marie Curie, Judy Blume, all kinds of different people who were icons of childhood at different times, and put quotes by those people up for the parents to remember, oh, these are what smart people who cared about kids had to say. I don't know if Marie Curie cared that much about kids, but she said some really cool things.
Well, so that's so as we kind of wrap up, I just want to kind of remind everybody who's listening to today's episode, again, we aren't saying you can't have them in your program. We aren't saying that we think it's bad. What we are trying to encourage you to do is, if you're going to use truly licensed. Go to Amazon, go to Fat Boy, or whatever the clingy website, the things for your walls are. Make sure that they're truly licensed. Decide if that fits with your program and the age of your kids. And then if you happen to be a program that shares a space. So again, a lot of times this does come back, especially related to this component, it would come back to more like churches. And, definitely, think about what's on the walls, because again, people who are decorating a Sunday school classroom may or may not have the same age kids in that classroom as what you're bringing. They may, have one thought about it where it might be fine for an 8-year-old, but a 3-year-old, maybe not. So always look at the impression that the age child is coming in is getting when they come to your classroom. And then what are the parents going to see? And so if you ever hear a parent grumble, another staff person grumble, take that time, go do some exploration and education on your own and see if perhaps maybe there's some validity to that. Maybe that isn't the person or the scene we should have on the wall.
And, that comes back to, the person that comes up with the most often in the past 5 years has been Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel. And there are issues with some of the things he did, but I'm still a Theodore Geisel fan because of him saying, yeah, I did some stuff when I was younger that was not great. Here's the star-bellied Sneetches to try to make up for it. And him specifically recognizing and growing. But that's my opinion, doesn't have to be yours. But he's an icon that used to be in every school every year in March, but is not as much today.
Well, I
as
mean,
it was
when
5
we
years
start
ago.
thinking about spring images, and you and I have talked about this a lot, and I think this is, we'll just leave it here because it's not really a childhood image, but it is something that children see all the time. And imagine being 3 and seeing a man nailed to a cross. Yeah. I mean, I know what the spring is, I know what Easter is, and there's a whole different thing between a baby in a manger than a man nailed to the cross, because I have seen some horrifically gory and too realistic versions of those in education buildings at churches. And, ever since the one time you and I had a whole discussion about, really what are you teaching by, the little rock in front of a cave? I mean, which again is something we often teach that time of year, but I had never really thought about it from, well, what am I teaching if you're 3?
Yeah.
What's the 3-year-old going to take away from that? So
That's another icon. I don't know if he's necessarily an icon of childhood, but he's definitely an icon.
But if you're in a church, you can't tell me that, even if you're not a program owned by a church. So, there's a couple of different ways, that does work, right? We do have a lot of programs that rent space. Well, even more, if you're renting space, you may not get to say what you do and do not have on your walls. So it may be on Monday, you take that thing down and you put it back up on Friday.
Absolutely.
So,
give some thought to what are the childhood icons that you guys want to put into your program, that you want to advocate. Are there any that you're like, absolutely not, we're not going to have? I can't, we're not going to have any vampires, no vampires. We're not doing, there's the little kid vampire in the Transylvania series. We're not doing the Transylvania series because we don't do vampires. Okay, fine. But I want you to make a conscious decision about it. And if you're a church-based program, do think about what your images are and what kids are going to learn from them. But if you're any program, think about, what do the images you have say to the kids and their parents, and put up the ones that reflect the values of your school.
And we all love dance music, and we all love to give the kids an opportunity to get their wiggles out. If you have to, please go at the minimum, get the Kid Bop version, because like today I was listening to all kinds of Olivia Newton-John songs, and I know I have danced with my kids screaming these lyrics. Really? Even if you are the one that I want, I do not need to be singing that at 3. And, and I dealt with that a lot with my youngest daughter when Mamma Mia came out as a movie. And yeah, she sang those songs all the time. High School Musical songs. Again, High School Musical, Disney. Have you actually thought through the words if they were coming out of a 5-year-old's mouth? So
yeah, or the Descendants, or whatever.
Yep.
It goes around right now that my nephews are watching. Well, they're older than you'd have at your center anyway, but it cycles. So think about it, have your staff think about it. It's a great topic for training. I know we keep talking about training all fall. We've been talking about it. We started in August. The first week of August, we started talking about staff training. Sorry, we're big about staff training. But it can just be some discussions, some active thought processes. So this one I think has gone a little long, but you can tell it was definitely something that Kate and I felt passionate about, and we just wanted to talk about it with you guys, because the Elvis movie came out this year. There have been a number of childhood icons that have passed away in the past, couple of months. And it's just weighing.
Icons for our decade.
Yep. Okay, guys. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast or any of our other podcasts, be sure to share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week.